Welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Sara Anjargolian, who is an attorney turned photographer. On her site, she says imagery for social change. Sara, welcome to CivilNet.
Thank you.
You're here because we are posting an amazing multimedia package that you've put together on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the earthquake in Gyumri. How long were you there? How did you do this? It's a tough thing what you've done, is to cover that territory again, yet in a new way.
I was there for 4 days, and I had kind of a general idea about the types of people I wanted to meet in Gyumri. So there was these sort of characters in my mind. So I started out with sort of an outline, and then I let myself diverge from it. So it's a little bit of kind of knowing what you want, but also kind of being willing to diverge from the sort of plan. And people in general in Hayastan, and in particular in Gyumri, love to tell their stories and love to bring you through their life's journey. So it was actually, half the battle was just showing up and deciding to do it, really.
I remember when we came in 1989, just 6 months after the earthquake. And I remember being astounded at how welcoming people were in that awful, seemingly hopeless, incredibly shocking situation. They didn't tell us to go get lost. Did they tell you to go get lost? 25 years later, what do you want from me?
Thankfully not, actually. Obviously there's always a certain level of suspicion when, a couple of people show up who people don't know in any country. But once I explained that I was interested in telling the story of the city 25 years later, there was a certain knowing look in people's eyes, because everyone who I came into contact with was interested in talking about that. People were just interested in telling me and my fellow journalist where they were 25 years ago, how far they've come, and in some cases how far they haven't come. So it was almost as if they were waiting for us, not us in particular, but
us.
Yeah, us, right.
Do you have any idea of the numbers of people that are still living in what we all comfortably call domings, little homes, that are essentially transportation containers, metal, tin? Right,
metal shipping containers. So it depends on who you talk to in terms of the numbers. The Gyumri-based journalists believe that approximately 4,500 families still live in domiks, in the metal shipping containers. I did have the opportunity to meet the mayor of Gyumri, who explained that the government feels that approximately 430 families are still owed apartments, according to the government figures. The difference between those two numbers is not necessarily, they don't necessarily, necessarily.
They're not contradictory.
They're not necessarily contradictory, because many people who did receive homes and apartments through the years made decisions either to sell them because they needed money, or oftentimes to not even receive the offer for different reasons.
Somebody offered them an apartment, the government, and they said no.
Yes. Yes, and I think that comes back to the way that aid was slowed down, because as we all know, the earthquake happened right at the time when the Soviet Union was collapsing. The Karabakh movement was just getting started, and so all of the sort of buildings that were promised by the Gorbachev administration either didn't happen or slowed down. So a family who was perhaps just a couple in a small studio apartment had 10 years later waiting in a domik turned into a 6-person family or a 7-person family. So the studio that was offered them didn't make any sense anymore, and they preferred to live in their 3-room domik versus a 1-room apartment.
Is there hindsight as part of the discourse? Do they say, gee, if we knew then what we know now, that we made the wrong decisions? Is there awareness that the people making decisions 25 years ago were Soviet citizens expecting the Soviet system to somehow kick in and do what it does? And today they're 25 years later no longer living in a Soviet system and perhaps doubting the process that they allowed to happen?
Oh, I mean, there's a huge amount of doubt, regardless of the earthquake. I think there's a huge amount of doubt in a lot of the people I spoke to in terms of the decisions that were made then and where they're going now even. Obviously, the biggest sort of talk of the town, not just in Gyumri, but all over the country, is how many of their children have left the country, as labor migrants. For example, one of the guys I photographed, a tinsmith, this guy has been doing this for 40 years, and he has a wonderful hand to build these gorgeous wood-burning fireplaces. And no matter what he does, his son is just not interested in picking that up. His son is much more interested in going and working in Russia and sending money back home. So the story of Gyumri wasn't just about the earthquake, but was really about those stories that have been kind of woven from that event and sort of multiplied tenfold as combined with the story of the country, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Did you find, although in your presentation there are several women, did you find, is there a discrepancy there in the way in which the men want to approach the camera and talk, or the women? Is there a difference?
Obviously, actually, it's interesting. I think being a woman makes it a lot easier in these circumstances.
You're being a woman, or the subject?
My being a woman, regardless of who the subject is. I generally have an easier time with women in general. I mean, just the spaces in which you are allowed, the bakeries and the kitchens, right?
Sure.
And the factory I went to was mostly women. There's just a certain, I don't even have to really speak. There's just this certain knowing thing, they're doing their thing, I'm doing mine. What was really cool actually about Gyumri, which was really interesting, I even texted a photojournalist friend of mine. It was two extremes. Either they had absolutely no problem being photographed, to the point where they didn't even look at the camera. One thing that you do as a photojournalist is you hope to make people so comfortable that they almost forget that you're in the room, so that they do what they do. And it was almost as if Gyumretsis already knew how to do that. Either that, or they just didn't care. I mean, they were so into what they were doing that it didn't really matter that this woman was kind of in every corner trying to get a shot. But on the other extreme, they absolutely would not be photographed. So there was this there was really no middle ground in Gyumri, which I have to say I really appreciated it, because I knew exactly where I stood right off the bat. It's as if either I'm a fly on the wall or they're not going to have it at all. So that was kind of nice.
The way you present what you present is a story about people, about humanity. There's a subtext of continuity. Whatever happens, things continue, stories evolve. We on the outside, thinking about Gyumri, watching about Gyumri, one of the first things that comes to my head is, how is it possible that we can all still take this situation for granted? 4,300 families are still in domiks for whatever reason, either because there's no affordable housing or because they never received the first set of assistance that one would think they were entitled to. Whichever the reason. Is there room to say that either the government or the international organizations or the diaspora messed up? They didn't step up to the plate, that there is no reason we should be in this situation today. Is that fair?
I mean, look, even if it's not about housing, we shouldn't be in the situation where we are today. I mean, the domik situation is just one example of layers of which the sort of grand we, have failed. And not necessarily about the bread and butter stuff like the shelter. We know how to build immediately a neighborhood for 4,500 people if we want to. But really, it's really what I found in these homes, the psychological situation, the transition of who people thought they were to who they are now. That's been the biggest problem, and that's why people may make a decision to stay in a domik as opposed to take a free apartment.
Can you explain that?
Well, it's sort of shock, right? You're in a situation of shock when everything has fallen apart around you, not just your home, but the country, the structure, everything, the factory you worked in. That sort of shock situation, I think, for some people, pushed them to make decisions that sort of may not make sense to a reasonable person, but it was a comfort zone. I mean, there are people I've met along the way who have been, for example, one of the people I met in Gyumri, an elderly lady scavenges in a nearby garbage dump to pick up things that she's going to burn for fuel. And it was very normal, you know. You live in that situation for so long that you hold on to something that's normal to you because it's your comfort zone. I mean, it sounds like a catchphrase, but that's really what it was like.
I remember, you don't, I remember in 88 and 89, the urgency with which not just general humanitarian help, but specialists, you know, from plastic surgeons, doctors, psychologists, teachers, flooded Armenia, specifically Gyumri and Spidag, to offer help. I remember the depth and immensity of that effort. But we didn't sustain it. Somewhere along the line, we, the diaspora, and we, the Armenian institutions, didn't sustain that. And now we aren't immediately linked to that place anymore. We sit back and look at pictures of it instead of rolling up our sleeves and saying, okay, here's the soup kitchen, here's the school, here's the kids center, and so forth. Something clicked, something broke.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I oftentimes wish that I could create an alternative touring schedule for Armenia, for people who come from the diaspora in particular to visit. Not that I don't want to show the beauty of Armenia, because I am head over heels in love with this country, and that's why I'm here. But really because I would love to have 10, 20 people with me when I knock on the door of those domiks, to sit with us and have a cup of tea and a cup of sush, so that they can understand the gray
reality.
The gray reality, because nothing in any of these stories is black and white. There really isn't a person to blame, or it's unbelievably complicated. And until you sort of feel that human situation, you just realize that this is just how it is for a million different reasons. Until you kind of feel that on your own skin, I think it's very difficult to engage the problems in a way that's going to make sense.
You live here. Could you have done the story if you didn't live here?
Well, you know, journalists do stories in places that they don't live all the time.
Yeah, and we see the results. Yeah. Which is why nobody understands half the world. Yeah. But that's okay. That was an editorial comment. Move on.
It's interesting because I have also kind of taken that path. I did a story in Africa a few years ago, and it was really, I was very interested in Africa, but also because I wanted to see what it would be like as someone completely not connected to a country like Africa to sort of show up and try to tell that story there. So of course you could, of course you could. One thing that I think that I'm able to do now, I'll put it that way, because I live here, is that first layer of shock, how could it be this way, emotional upheaval, and all that junk and stuff that you feel when you first, are dealt that hand in a story, that doesn't happen to me anymore. I'm able to knock on the door of a domik, walk in, have a cup of tea, and have a conversation, and kind of get to the meat of the story, as opposed to dealing with my own stuff. It's not about me anymore. It's really about the person that's sitting in front of me. And I have to say, I'm really happy about that. I don't know if that's because I'm getting older and I'm kind of, sort of, there's some wisdom, but I don't know. But I'm happy about that.
Well, we are too. And we're thankful that you did. We're glad to have done this in collaboration with HITC. And we will be posting it up on the 25th anniversary of the earthquake of Gyumri and Spidag, and hope that next year the story will be different.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sara Anjargolian, and thank you for following us on CivilNet.